Let's build a simple but future-proof and scalable map for our game. It's Evgeny, welcome to Jamforge Games. We continue our series about making 3D action RPG game, and this episode about exploration phase and specifically terrain and props. Let's define some scope first, what we do and what we should avoid. We're absolutely not doing massive open world like Zelda or Skyrim. It would require a massive amount of production time and not feasible for indie or even small studios. Procedurally generated dungeon is a proven and solid strategy for ARPG. Recently dropped Moonlighter is a great example of such game, but it gravitates more to roguelike genre, and it's technically a challenging task, so I want something simpler for the first game. I would like to have more like Lance Island, some reasonable size map split into small chunks or set of small maps. It would allow to start fast, but scale as much as needed later without changing the concept. So I drew a concept of a map. It's reasonably small to mid-size level that have several ways to explore, a bunch of points of interest and sprinkled zone where we can dynamically generate random encounters or events. So before start, I needed to answer two questions to choose the right approach. The first question, I needed to figure out the way to generate the terrain itself. The most recommended way I found is using Terrain 3D extension for Godot. But based on my previous experience with Unity, I can say that usually such tools are too complicated and opinionated. Plus it's a third party, so I hesitate. Another reason is I want to learn things, not just produce a final product here. Another popular approach is to completely procedurally generate terrain. It's amazingly flexible and provides unlimited replayability, like Valheim or Minecraft, but it would require a lot of effort to make it right. So the trade-off is between handcrafted and well-designed map on one hand and unlimited variations on the other hand. What to choose? A lot of games choose in between, to have static level but randomized encounters and loot. I choose this way as well. It's the fastest way forward, and I can tune gameplay variations and replayability by adding more random encounters and proper itemization. And I also want to speed things up, so I started with just a plain surface, no verticality for now, but the same approach should work later when we replace it with a proper mesh. Second question, how to place vegetation, resources and enemies on the map. Static non-destructible objects could be placed manually. For small to medium-sized map it's reasonable. Grass, resources and some vegetation can be done dynamically to save time and add some randomness. And I'll tell more about in the next episode. So this is the solution I landed. To define different types of surface, I'm using a simple texture. Again, cutting corner, no RGB channels separation, no baking, just black and white, monochrome, white is road, black is grass, and the same texture will serve multiple purposes. It will be used for sampling surface textures, then it will also can be used to sample where grass should grow. And finally, it can be used for trees and resources as spawn area. Just one map texture. Okay, let's jump into Godot and I'll show how it works. Let's try to make a simple example of how to recreate the approach I just described. First, we need a mesh. I use built-in plane mesh. The only problem with that, the dimensions of this mesh is 1 by 1, so we need to scale it to our size. It's not usually the best way. If you create a custom mesh, you better set up the size in your 3D modeling software and keep the scale 1. So now we need to define a material. For custom shader, we need a shader material. And we need to create a custom shader. There are two ways to create shaders. First is regular shader using a shader programming language and the visual shader. I frankly think everybody should use Visual Shader because in case you don't need an existing node and you need some code, there is a special expression node in Visual Shader that basically can combine both worlds. Yeah, let's open our shader editor. First thing you should do is make sure you switch to fragment shader, because vertex shader is basically manipulating of geometry vertices. It's actually before rasterization of your picture, and fragment shader is essentially once your geometry become a set of pixels. So the shader is gonna work on each fragment, or usually fragment is 1 to 1 to pixel. It will work for each fragment and where we can manipulate all colors and other properties. So first we need to add a couple of texture nodes. We can add them directly by placing a texture, or we can create them as parameters. I don't recommend expose a lot of parameters and make a really general purpose complex shader at the very beginning, because in most cases your shader is going to be applicable just to a single material. So in this example I'm not going to expose parameters, I'm just going to just pick texture I need to demonstrate the concept. So the first texture is going to be a grass. So if we actually link to albedo and set the color as data, we already have like essentially our texture on the map. As you can see, it's basically scaled like too large because the UV is from 0 to 1. Essentially the texture is kind of stretched to the whole mesh. What we can do usually is there is special node UV scaling where we can set up the scale of UV. This is something you can move to parameters to set up a different texture and tune it up. It's usually a manual process depending on your mesh size, texture, how tiling is set up. Some textures would need actually several layers to make sure tiling is not really obvious. I think we can scale something like 20 here. You can also see the tiling happening right now. You can see this weird pattern. Again, I'm not gonna explain how to get rid of the tiling. I put the link in the description of this video to the really great video about how to several ways to avoid tiling and textures. So, but we would like to mix actually the grass and road, so we need to add a second texture. Second texture is gonna be our road texture. So how like to mix them? To mix them, there is a mix node, but the color is a vector of 3, so we put it here. Let's put the grass A and put the road B. And I know you cannot see it right now, but if we actually do like something like 0.8, 0.8, you can already, sorry, it's too much. Yeah, you can see it's kind of a mix of the road and the grass that's slightly greenish. So, but we want to use the map, like, right, we want to like place some part of the grass, some part of road. So this is the third parameter, which is actually manipulating this and picking a different values. Is how like we control. So what we do is we actually add another texture, and here we can put map. I recommend create a parameter for this one because you would like probably to have several maps and swap this texture. You don't really need to control once you set up like this part, but this part is probably like something you would need to control often, so yeah, it makes sense to keep it as parameter. Also, you don't need to scale UV because we want this map to be exactly stretched to the whole level. And if we plug this, probably here we go. Yeah, we already have like part of the grass and part of the road. Again, we can tune a little bit of scaling here to make it more kind of looking good. So the tuning all these different parameters and to have a great look is a really complex part of technical art, and feel free to spend time on this. Again, you need like to correct a couple of items here to avoid tiling for both textures, maybe like tune some colors. One thing I also recommend to add to actually tune it better is a node called curve texture. So the curve allow you to set up the fall off between two different textures. So we need to go here to inspector and create a new curve, and here you can actually set up how the fall off like should work. And again, manipulating this, you can it be more kind of the look you want. For example, if you want that road very strict kind of fall off, you basically do like almost straight line, and if you can see the very sharp edges between texture of road and texture of grass. If you want a more smooth, you just like increase this like size of this curve and you see like it's getting more smooth. Again, it's something for you as a digital artist to tune based on your preferences and your style of game and how you want to make it look like. So yeah, so this is a map. Later we can actually use the same texture to sample for grass and different properties and resources to spawn. So let's go and check out how to actually spawn some grass and how to sample the texture in your code script to actually instantiate all different objects using the same texture. Right, so to show you example of how to sample the same texture to spawn some different resources, I want to show you the one function of grass manager is basically the class that does spawning a grass only on those part of texture that actually represents grass, not on the road. You can ignore chunks for now. Essentially what we need is the base position plus the number of instances to generate. So the most important line is probably here, is this, we are getting this texture 2D parameter and then we get an image object from this texture. And this gives us essentially access to the pixels of our texture. Then we use a simple for loop to generate random positions. So we getting random X and random Y. We do some adjustment on the base position. Then we convert world coordinates to UV based on the size of our level. And finally, we multiply on this texture image size because your texture can be different like sizes. It can be 1024, it can be 2048, it can be even 4K texture. And the most important is basically image gap pixel at this position. So this is a sampling of the pixel. And what do we do next is compare the pixel to some specific value. And if its value white, basically white is for road, yeah, so it's so in that case we continue to the next step of the loop and ignoring generation at this position. It's pretty dumb algorithm, so we don't do any retries, so part of our samples just dropped, but it's pretty good enough. If you want to debug before creating the final result, you can actually also use image to set pixel at the position and then compare original texture and the final texture with red color. Oh, we use a red channel, but it doesn't matter because, as I said before, we're not baking separate channels. So white color essentially has all channels equal values, so it can be red, green or blue, it doesn't matter. Yeah, and then we just create a transform at random scale and translate to the position we need slightly like above, and we remember this position. And we can use this transform later to instantiate any resource scene or any grass multi-mesh instances, whatever we want. This method is just create transform to scatter according to our sampling textures. So in next episode, we're going to talk about how to spawn different resources and make actually them pickable. We're also going to talk about composition and how to define different feature for our player and enemies. And in some future episode, probably how to set up inventory system. Leave the comments below and please subscribe and see you later.